Welcome to the Nerdstalgic podcast with your host, the Ginger Bookworm. Nerdstalgic with the Ginger Bookworm. Nerdstalgic with the Ginger Bookworm.
For every choice there is an echo. With each act we change the world. One man chose a city, free of law and God, but others chose corruption, and so the city fell. If the world were reborn in your image, would it be a paradise or purgation? Sofia Lamb. Howdy folks, and welcome back to the Nerdstalgic podcast with me, your host Luke. Hope you're doing well, hope you're all good. As per usual, we're back in Rapture, we're back under the sea. We've come back, the city has called to us like a siren call in our dreams, in our feelings, in our emotions. We are back in Rapture. 8 years later, it's Bioshock 2. Well, it's 8 years later in the game. In real life, it's just been about 2 weeks. But it feels like 8 years, especially if you've played Bioshock. You know, you play it once, the game will keep calling you back, and you've got to replay it multiple times because it's just one of those games that's just so effective. You know, it's a fantastic series. But I'm back doing Bioshock 2. I had planned for this to come out last week, but I had to do Mortal Engines instead because I just hadn't finished the game, and being so busy with work and other things, I just didn't have the time. I really wanted to, but I thought I didn't want to leave anybody high and dry. That's why we got the short side quest Mortal Engines review. Check it out if you haven't checked it out now. Hope people have been enjoying it. But we're back for Bioshock 2. But before I get into it, before I get into all the fun stuff, I do want to say, make sure that you follow me on Twitter at nerdstalgic_pod for all things and everything that I'm playing, watching, talking about, nerdy things, anything like that. You know, just you'll find it on Twitter. You'll be updated first there of anywhere else. Also, if you listen to this on YouTube, don't forget to give me a like, comment, and subscribe. Anything that you can do to help me grow there is absolutely fantastic. Currently, as of recording this, I'm on 83 subscribers, which is incredible because I'm a podcast which is audio based on YouTube. I know, I can't believe it either, but the goal is hopefully by Christmas I can get to at least 90 to 100. I think that's possible. We're really, really close. So if you can help me out there, I would be incredibly grateful. Also, as I mentioned, 2 weeks ago, I released my deep dive review into Bioshock 1. So if you haven't listened to that there now, go back and check that out. Also, prior to that, I did a sort of deep dive into the prequel novel that not just covers Bioshock 1, but also covers events and characters in Bioshock 2, as well as everything that happened before the events of the two games, of the foundation of Rapture and the fall of Rapture. It's absolutely incredibly fascinating. I take it in a different spin. I look into how the book could be used as the foundation for a potential movie or series, and hopefully knowing that Netflix are looking into that they will sort of be quite clever in themselves and do their research and see that there's a book, and hopefully they use the book as a foundation and follow that. That's my hope anyway. That's my sort of fingers crossed sort of moment. But we will see. Go back and check both those episodes out. They're on YouTube now as well, but they're also on Spotify, so go check them out. Whenever you find podcasts, or wherever you want to find my podcast, just look there and you'll find them. Right, so all that's done. Bioshock 2. Now, I'm going to say something about Bioshock 2 that is going to shock a lot of people, and I feel like I'm probably going to lose credibility as a reviewer and as a gamer. But I have to say this, and again, it goes against everything that I said in the first review for when I reviewed Bioshock 1. But I have to be honest with you, Beans, and I got to be honest with myself, right? And I'm going to say it, so be prepared. If you're driving, pull over because you might crash. You might be in shock, but I prefer Bioshock 2 to Bioshock 1. Now, hold on a second. Don't panic and riot and call for a trial, right? Let's just chill out for a second here, right? Bioshock 1 is a masterpiece. Bar none, the end, cut dry, it is. Just a masterpiece. That game's fantastic, right? It's perfect. Just because I prefer Bioshock 2 does not mean that it means it's better or that I think it's a masterpiece. There are things in Bioshock 2 that I don't like. Trust me, I will mention them. And there are things that could be changed or could have not been in at all. That being said, I prefer to play Bioshock 2 multiple times over Bioshock 1. And I'll try my best to convey as to why in the review. But the simple premise is it gives me more than that I want. As I stated quite clearly, and as is quite evident in the other two episodes that I did on Bioshock, I am a sucker for lore. Anybody who's listened to the podcast for long enough knows that I love anything to do with lore. And whenever I get invested into a book series, movie, video game, whatever it is, if I'm invested, I want to know more about this world that I'm being shown. So then I'll go off and I'll read the external books. I will read the comics. I will, listen to sort of dramatization, audio sort of books. I'm Audible and that sort of thing. If I'm interested in the lore in the world, I will do my own research and I will look into it, right? And in Bioshock 1, you get the foundations, shall we say, of what Rapture is, who Andrew Ryan is, who Atlas is, why you're there, what this city is. But the perspective of Rapture that you get to see is the rich, the famous, the sort of well endowed sort of people. The people who, let's be honest, the 1% sort of people, how they lived, how they functioned, how it affected them. But really, the story wasn't about them. Really, you just happened to be in those environments. The story was mostly focused on sort of Andrew Ryan and him going crazy and his sort of a battle against Atlas. And don't me wrong, the story's perfect. You get enough lore that you need. If you want more, you listen to the audio novel, the audio sort of diaries that you find throughout the levels. But apart from that, it is mostly just sort of pumped in your face of like you've got a very narrow sort of lore. If you want to explore more, you can just by looking around at the presentation and the world building, but it's mostly just very linear. Whereas the reason I enjoy Bioshock 2 over Bioshock 1 is because I get more lore, I get more story, I get more sort of a visual representation of what happened in Rapture, because at the end of the day, Rapture's the people. Yes, majority of the people that lived in Rapture were the 1%, were the rich, were the famous, were the artists, were the sort of surgeons, doctors, that sort of thing. The rich people, the people who could afford to sort of live in high society. You had those lot. But Bioshock 2 shows a different light. It shows you the average Joe. It shows you the people that lived in the city, the workers. You know what I mean? It gives you more sort of insight into who they are. The people who actually made the city, who ran the city, who kept the city going, really. There's more story there. There's more a story that I personally I can relate to. Especially when you get into sort of who Subject Alpha is, who Sophia Lamb is, the whole idea behind the Big Daddy program and why it was made, and what Atom is made for and what Adam can do, and how it affected people and their personal lives, how people first started getting addicted to Adam, and then how eventually got to the point where some people were selling their bodies and selling things that they owned and that sort of thing to get more Adam because they had to kind of perpetuate this addiction. You get more of that story. You don't just get people who was taking drugs and went crazy and started a rebellion. You just get a lot more. And in terms of story, it's fantastic, and it just takes the gameplay of Bioshock 1, improves it, makes it more fun and makes it a bit more challenging and boosts it up. It takes the mini game function from the first game, which was very annoying, which one thing I really didn't like. I didn't mention it in the review because I hardly did it, because I just had so much money that I would auto hack my way through everything, or just not hack at all. Especially if I'm like New Game Plus, you hardly ever had to hack because you had all the upgraded weapons that you just killed things so quickly that you always had ammo. And I had tonics to make sure that I had enough ammo supply and all that jazz. But the point I'm trying to make is they took everything from the first game that made it good, and they improved upon it. They improved upon the story, they improved upon the gameplay, Luke, speak English. They improved on the visuals, they improved on the presentation. Everything was just improved, right? And that's why I like it. It took all the good bits of Bioshock 1 and just improved upon it. Now, just because you can improve on something that's already perfect doesn't mean that thing is instantly perfect, right? There were certain things that they did and there were certain things that were changed where I would say it's not a masterpiece, but but it's still a pretty great game. And I've never understood as why people give Bioshock 2 so much hate, why so many people kind of sort of are so negative about it, give it so much hate and crap, really. It doesn't deserve it in my books. And I feel like as the years have gone on and people have gone back to Bioshock 2, especially since the remastered editions came out a couple of years ago, that people are actually replaying Bioshock 2 now with a lot more mature eyes, a lot more sort of people have grown up who were young, who played it, who now understands the whole backstory behind Sophia Lamb and what the story is trying to tell you. That I feel a lot of people are starting to kind of less take it for granted and more understand that it's a bit of a hidden gem, that it's actually, it deserves to be in sort of the group of Bioshock games. It's not like that sort of black sheep of the family. Like, it does deserve to be there in between Bioshock 1 and Bioshock Infinite. Again, Infinite gets loads of hate as well, which I've never understood, because I played Infinite and I thought that was a fantastic game. So I just wanted to make that clear. I do have a bit of a soft spot for Bioshock 2. It was the game that sort of took everything that I loved and made it better. It isn't the better game. It isn't sort of the perfect game, but I just enjoy it more. So I just wanted to be open and honest about that. And I just wanted to kind of sort of put my cards on the table and just be completely honest, completely. As for sort of the production of the game, so Bioshock 2 is a first-person shooter video game developed by 2K Marin and published by 2K Games. It was released worldwide for PlayStation 3, Windows, and Xbox 360 on February the 9th, 2010. After the success of Bioshock 2, after the success of Bioshock, should I say, 2K Games formed a new studio, 2K Marin, to create the sequel. 2K Australia, Arcane Studios, and Digital Extremes provided additional support. The developers focused on improving gameplay elements from the first game and returned to Rapture's setting to explore a new perspective of the city. The story received major changes throughout development. Gary Shaman, who composed Bioshock soundtrack, returned to the sequel. He explained the game's sonic palette to include more blues and religious music to parallel its themes. Bioshock 2 received positive reviews with praise directed at its narrative, themes, art style, character endings, and gameplay. Criticisms included a slow start and failure to distinguish itself from its predecessor. The multiplayer mode was supported with downloadable content, and a single-player campaign expansion, Minerva's Den, was released in August 2010. The game sold more than 3 million copies but did not meet the publisher's sales expectations. While its reviews average was worse than Bioshock, retrospectives have re-evaluated Bioshock 2 as a worthy entry, or even the best of the series. A remastered version was released as part of Bioshock the Collection for PlayStation 4, Windows, Xbox One, and Nintendo Switch. So development was rocky. The development with this game, it went through a lot. Like, it wasn't Irrational Games that we went through. It wasn't the original sort of writers. The reason being is that the original writers of Bioshock and the original creators, when approached by 2K to make a sequel game, they basically said no. Like, we don't know anywhere. Like, we don't want to basically rehash the story we've already told. We told a good, fine, complete story in Bioshock, in Rapture. There's nowhere else to explore it. We don't want to rehash ourselves. We want to do something new. Obviously, 2K were like, okay, fair enough. We want to make a Bioshock 2. So they ended up making a new studio to kind of head sort of the development of that, as well as Irrational Games went off and sort of went to work on Bioshock Infinite. So if it wasn't for Bioshock 2, we probably would have waited a few years, and then Bioshock Infinite probably would have been the sequel. So Irrational Games made that one. But this one was made by 2K Marin. That's it. Right, so in contrast to the first Bioshock's focus on libertarianism and Ayn Rand's philosophies, Bioshock 2 focuses on collectivism ideals. Lamb's philosophy of altruism recalls that of Karl Marx and John Stuart Mill. Her motto is, "Make the world your family," meaning force your mind into becoming loyal to the world in a way unusually reserved for your child. And that's intellectually daunting said Thomas. Unlike the first game's questions of free will and destiny, Thomas said that the player character is almost the ultimate individual, whom Lamb guards to fulfill her goal. Professor Ryan Lizardi draws parallels between Bioshock 2's themes of community versus the individual, the extremes of Ryan and Lamb's philosophies, and the issues of McCarthyism and the hippie movement that occurred in the mid 20th century. Bioshock 2 specifically asks players to question all sides of debates when extreme stances are taken. Bioshock 2 also deals with cult personalities, technocracy, moral absolutionism, fatherhood, class war, equalitarianism. They don't make this easy for dyslexics, do they? Parenthood, childhood, and family. So the themes of Bioshock 2, is very different to Bioshock 1. Bioshock 1 was very much the fact of taking your freedom back, not being censored, not being told what you can and can't do, being basically said, if you believe it, if you think you can do it, you should do it. There's nobody going to hold you back. Just go forth and do it. And if it blows up in your face, it blows up in your face. It was your choice. It's your life. Very much free will. That was Andrew Ryan's sort of original core of what Rapture was to be. It was to be a utopia where you could do whatever you want, that the sweat of your brow would actually be worth your work and your time and your effort, and it's all yours. All the profits would be for you, no matter what. But the problem is with that breeds corruption. And with corruption brings failure, and with failure brings the fall of everything, right? Where Sofia Lamb is more so the fact of the way she runs things is that she's like, look what Andrew Ryan led us. Look where Atlas, Fontaine, where did he lead us? Look at these prophets that we put up as our gods. And look where they've shown us where they got us. They got us nowhere. They got us to a city in ruin. I have now come with you to a promise. If we come together as a family, as a unit, as a community, and we work together to make things better, then Rapture can die, and this new world, this new sort of utopia can grow. Because Rapture was Ryan's idea, not Sofia Lamb's idea. So we have to get rid of Rapture. We have to get rid of Ryan. I think that he deals with and gets rid of all that ideologies and bring in a new utopia, a new sort of rise. So it deals with cultism, it deals with religion, it deals with different sort of philosophies of Karl Marx and John Stuart Mill, make the world better by being community. And again, that could work. But the problem is, Rapture, by the time you get there 8 years later in this story, by the time Rapture's there, Rapture's fallen to pieces. It's literally coming apart at the seams. Sofia Lamb has decided to make her utopia in a corpse, and she's blinded by her philosophy that she doesn't see that Rapture is dying. He already died. It died a long time ago, and it died 8 years ago in the first Bioshock game, and it's dying now. And her hope and her feeling is that if we bring back the Little Sisters, if we bring back this idea of community and the ideals of Atom, and we worship the Little Sisters, and we pump all the Adam into Eleanor and make her a god, that she can bring us up bring this city back, and not just bring the city back, but then we can kind of leave Rapture eventually, go back to the surface and spread our word, spread our sort of meaning and life and philosophy to the rest of the world, i.e. take the rest of the world over and all that jazz. Again, it would have worked originally, that idea, if Andrew Ryan hadn't sort of made Rapture. If Sofia Lamb had made Rapture, it would have been more of a cult. But again, it probably would have worked because it would have been a lot more sort of like communism. It would have been like the people for the people. Everybody works for each other. You know what I mean? Also, I'm not going to get into the philosophy of it because we'll be here all day. If we was going to break down the philosophy of Rapture and Bioshock, this would be a completely multiple different topics and different episodes. But the point is, there are differences between Andrew Ryan and Sofia Lamb. Ryan wanted a utopia. He wanted freedom. He wanted free will. He wanted you to be whatever you wanted to be, which breeds corruption. Sofia Lamb wants community. She wants togetherness. She wants people to come together and to be in a family. But that eventually sort of peters on to cultism and false prophets and idealism, and it doesn't end very well. So both of them work, but without a balance and with too many people, um, they kind of fail. All like they all eventually work. All these sort of idealists and the capitalism and socialism and what's it, communism, all these sort of isms, they work in small groups because humans work better in small groups. When we're in a small town of people, when we're in a small community of less than 150 people, these sort of isms work. But when you start to branch out to more people, to hundreds, to thousands of people, that's when things start to fail and things start to like basically fall to pieces. Because humans, we're social animals, but we only really are meant to function in small groups. If any bigger than certain amounts of people, it just breeds corruption and failure. And again, I'm not going to get into the politics and all that behind Rapture and the whole sort of philosophy behind Rapture. The point is I'm trying to make is the fact of they have different ideologies, but neither of them work because the world that they're in has already failed before they've even begun. And you see it in Bioshock 1, and you definitely see it wholeheartedly in Bioshock 2. And this is why, again, I'll come back to the fact of why I enjoy Bioshock 2 so much, because you have hindsight. You've seen the events of Bioshock 1, and if you've read the book Bioshock Rapture, you've seen it all, basically. And again, I always hint to it, but please read that book. It gives you so much more insight into this world. It's unbelievable. But by the time you get to Bioshock 2, and you see how somebody's trying to restart everything, but you know it's a failed experiment. You know that it's worthless. There's no point to it. That you can't help not sit there and feel sorry for the splicers, the people that are left, and the people that are not spliced up, the people that are stuck there, like Stanley and Grace and Gil and all that. You feel sorry for them. You feel sorry for everybody. Most importantly, you feel sorry for Sofia Lamb. You feel sorry for Tenenbaum. You feel sorry for them all because most of them are trapped there. They can't leave, but they're trapped in that ideology, and that when they're given the chance to leave, a lot of them just decide to stay there because what is life for them now other than Rapture? They can't leave even if they wanted to because they're mentally stuck there. That is their world now. That is their life. So they will stay there with the city and they will crumble with it. And it's very sad, really. It's a bummer. It really is. It's a true pain. But again, that's Bioshock. That's Rapture for you. It's a place where people came to be free and found out that it's not heaven, it's hell. Under the sea, in the deep, dark, cold abyss. Anyway, as for the story, I went a bit sort of depressive there. I do apologise. As for the story, where is my there it is. Right, I wrote this down. I did come prepared. All right. Set 8 years after the events of the first game, Bioshock 2 follows Subject Delta, a prototype Big Daddy sent on a quest to reunite with the little sister he was previously bonded to, Eleanor, across a changed and even more dangerous Rapture. The game explores more brutal gameplay than its predecessor, with new enemies, weapons, plasmids, and gene tonics. It also offers a much more different version of Rapture, ruled by ideals completely opposed to the vision of the city's founder, Andrew Ryan. In 1968, roughly 8 years after the events in Bioshock, Rapture is now under the control of ex-missionary and psychiatrist Sofia Lamb, whose ideas for human progression are a sharp contrast to the city's deceased founder, Andrew Ryan. While Ryan believed in the genius of the individual, Lamb believes in collective efforts and the power of the community, as well as a philosophy surrounding butterfly imagery indicating rebirth. She considers Rapture's failure to be the undeniable proof that the self is the root of all evil and suffering. Under Sofia's rule, the first generation of little sisters have matured into adolescence. The big sisters are, as they are now known, are highly aggressive and have the ability to use plasmids absorbed from gathering as a child. Sofia sends big sisters out to the coastline across the Atlantic, kidnapping little girls and turning them into the new little sisters. Now, if anybody played Bioshock 1, you know that if you wanted the good ending of Bioshock 1, or even if you wanted the bad ending, whatever ending you chose, if you chose the good ending, you harvested all of you, like you saved all the little sisters, and at the end of that, when you left Rapture, all the little sisters left with you. On the flip side, if you get the bad ending, if you decide to harvest all of the little sisters, then there are no little sisters left. So either way, which one you choose, all the little sisters are basically saved or taken away from Rapture. Now, as I mentioned in my last review, the little sisters and the big daddies, they work in tandem with each other. Especially the little sisters, most importantly, they are the lifeblood. They are what keep Rapture running. You know, if the atom's not there, then the city will crumble quicker and it will go into the sea quicker. So what Sofia Lamb decides to do is to grow whatever little sisters are left, any of the little sisters that were left behind. They're now adults. Basically, manipulate them into big sisters, send them up to the surface, kidnap little girls from local towns and cities and that sort of thing, bring them back to Rapture, put the sea slugs into them to make them little sisters, and then start producing again, right? But the whole idea behind a big daddy and the whole idea behind all that, you know, it's gone now. Like they don't want big daddies. Big daddies are the big no-no, so they try to get rid of them, and they worship the little sisters. The little sisters are no longer being attacked by the splicers. The splicers now worship them, now protect them. They now feel like it's their duty to take over from the big daddies, which is bad news for you as Subject Delta. One, because Sofia Lamb hates you as it is, but also the fact that because you are a big daddy, they see you as trying to steal the little sisters away from the family. So you're target number one, basically. You've already got the sort of target on your back before you even begin. At a New Year's Eve celebration, 1958, Subject Delta, the first Big Daddy to be successfully pair bonded to a little sister, is starting his usual rounds with his little sister when she races ahead and is attacked by a group of splicers. Naturally, Delta defends his gatherer, but is stopped when the last splicer hits him with a hypnotized plasmid. Sofia Lamb then appears and informs him that his little sister is actually her daughter, Eleanor Lamb. Before forcing him to take a pistol to his own head and pull the trigger, 10 years later, Delta is revived at a Vita chamber and begins to receive telepathic messages from Eleanor, pleading for his help. Delta encounters Dr. Bridget Tenenbaum, who tells him that in order to save Eleanor and stop Lamb, he must travel across the ruins of Rapture to Fontaine Futuristics, where Eleanor is being held. If he does not, his bond will stop with his heart if he stays too far from the little sister, preventing him from escaping Rapture and eventually killing him. On his journey, Delta is aided by Tenenbaum's new ally, Augustus Sinclair, a businessman and confidence trickster. Delta also receives aid from Eleanor, who uses her psychic connection to the new little sisters to leave care packages and messages for him throughout Rapture. I was reading off my notes and realised I made a mistake. It's not 10 years, it's 8 years, so I do apologise there. Also, one thing I have to mention that I annoyed me when I first played this game and annoyed me the multiple times I played it and leading up to playing it again for this review. Dr. Tenenbaum's Dr. Tenenbaum's absence, right? You meet her, you hear from her pretty much at the beginning of the game. You see her once in person, right? And then she palms you off. She's like, "I'd love to help you, but I've got to help. I've got to save, the little sisters that I left. I've got to get them out. So you save them, and I'll put you in contact with my sort of friend Sinclair, and that's it." And it annoys me because I love Tenenbaum. She's one of my favourite characters in the whole series. I love her. The reason I love her so much is because she has such a big role and she's so fascinating and interesting. Her backstory is such an incredible backstory, mainly from the book. If you read the book, you'll understand why I like Tenenbaum so much. So it does annoy me that you've kind of introduced her from Bioshock 1 and then we don't get any more of her throughout the game. It would have been nice if she popped up here and there, or even she pops up at the end to confront Sofia Lamb with you. Kind of have a go, like, how dare you sort of take my sort of technology and continue it? How dare you ruin what I tried my best to stop, or something like that. It would have been nice for that sort of extra bit of detail, but it never really progresses. On the flip side, they are looking into making another Bioshock game. Now, even though I don't want a Bioshock game that's a reboot, I don't want to go back to Rapture because if you ask my opinion, right, even though I love Bioshock 1 and 2, and I love Rapture deeply, I really, really do, we have seen and done everything. I've been everywhere in Rapture. I've been to the high society and I've been to the paupers. I've been everywhere. I've been both sides of the coin. I've been like, there's no other place I need to go. In Rapture, I've explored it. I've explored all the themes and the stories there. That lets us leave Rapture to die under the ocean. Let's just give it a good death. Let's not try rehash anything, right? But so Tenenbaum's still alive, okay? As far as I know, it would be interesting if they could bring her back somehow. Maybe if they decide to do Bioshock 4, um, and it's set in space, or it's set, I don't know, underground, or it's set in the jungle or something like that, or wherever they decide to set Bioshock 4. Um, it would be interesting if they bring Sophia Lamb back. They wouldn't have to. If they want to do a completely different story, that's fine. But again, it leaves it open for the fact of more Sophia Lamb in the I mean, Sophia Lamb, more Tenenbaum in the future. I love Tenenbaum. Tenenbaum's fantastic. She's an incredible character. But it does angst me that she's not as focused in the story as much. But Sinclair's an interesting character anyway, you know. But yeah, so that's basically the introduction. I've spoken about my feelings on Bioshock 2, or my initial feelings anyway. I talked about the game's production, a bit about the philosophy of this game compared to the first game, and I gave sort of a brief sort of telling of the plot. Not all of it, because obviously I don't want any spoilers. There's nothing really in Bioshock 2 I would say is as spoilerific as Bioshock 1. There's no big, like, would you kindly twist in this one. But again, like I mentioned in that review, in all honesty, you can't top that. Bioshock can't even top itself, because once you've done it once, it's perfect, and everybody who tries to do it then following on is copying it, and unless they do it very cleverly, it will be seen by miles away by fans. So it's one of those things of, like, you could try to sort of what's the word? You can try to rebuild Rome, but it will never be the same Rome. You know what I mean? Like, it won't be as grand and as impressive, as perfect as the first Rome was. But then even that failed eventually. You know. But even so, I don't want to ruin it for anybody who hasn't played Bioshock 2, who's listening to this review thinking, I've never heard of Bioshock. Luke got me interested in Bioshock 1. I'm now listening to him talk about Bioshock 2. I want to see what it's about. I want to see where it goes in terms of story. So I don't want to ruin it for anybody, and I don't want to give any big hints and that sort of thing. So I'm going to stay away from sort of major spoilers. But like I mentioned, there's not many big ones in here that's really going to ruin your gameplay sort of experience, or your enjoyment of that sort of way. Because again, there's no sort of big sort of got your sort of twist moment like Would You Kindly. I thought there was going to be when I first played it, because the main character Sinclair keeps calling you Sport, and I thought, oh, maybe that's it, but no, it's not. It's just the way he talks. But that's it. That's the introduction. It's probably the longest introduction I've ever done. It's 32 minutes right now as I'm talking. So I'm going to shut up now, and I'm going to move on. This one thing I do want to say quickly, the format for this one is a bit different from the format from the last review, mainly because I've taken a few things out, because a lot of the things in this game are pretty much the same in terms of weapons and plasmids. You get some new weapon, you get mostly new weapons, but the plasmids are somewhat the same, so I won't talk about certain things as much. So this one will be a bit of a, well, hopefully will be sort of somewhat longer but shorter, if that makes sense. But we will see. I'm already at 32 minutes now with introduction, so that's out the window. But yeah, so on to the review, starting with the presentation. Right, so the presentation. So as I said, this Rapture is different. 8 years have passed since the events of the first game, and many years have passed since the golden age of Rapture, since the Civil War. And as you can imagine, with Civil War and strife and struggles between land and all that, and different sort of groups wanting to take a bit of piece of Rapture, has really sort of spread this city thin. So now, in the events of Bioshock 2, 8 years later, Rapture is a wreck. As I said in the first game, it's dying. It was already dying. and now it is but a shell of itself. It's very poetic in a way. It's very dreary. It's very sad. It's very Keats. You know what I mean? It's very much of like it once was something beautiful, but now it has been left to despair. You know what I mean? Um, and now you've got Sophia Lamb, who's trying her best to kind of bring it all back together and kind of recruit this whole ideas and this whole sort of presentation of the family of like Karl Marx and John Stuart Mill, as I mentioned, try to take in all these sort of concepts and turn it into something that it can no longer be because it can't sustain anything other than just slowly sink into the ocean. All it can sustain is water, and it's doing it very quickly. And as this game goes on, Sophia Lamb ends up in the way to try to stop you, ends up flooding most of the city. Like she opens up the floodgates and just lets a lot of places of the city just flood of water, killing her own people just to take you out. So she's already flooding the city. So she's making things worse as the story progresses anyway. But you get to, as I mentioned, what I love about this game so much is that you get to see how Rapture is now. You get to see how the after effects of everything that you did in the first game, and the effects of the characters that are now stuck there, how far they have degraded. Even the splicers have changed. The splicers look worse off than they did. They've had been more years of addiction to this drug. It's taken them over to some to state that they don't even look human anymore. You have new enemies like the brutes, or like tanks, big giant enemies that just are bullet sponges, and you have them. They've evolved to just be hulking monstrosities. The big daddies that are left are crazy. Are just losing their mind. The big sisters who were once little sisters, they're now taking over completely of the role of the big daddies. The little sisters are more sort of disheveled and dreary and depressive. Really, everything just has that central note of decay, of there's a word I was looking for, then I've lost it, but a just sense of loss, and it is sad. But one thing that I love that they did with this game was that every area that you go into really reflects not just the world of how it is, Rapture how it is now, but also the reflects the characters you meet in there. So you meet characters like Grace, you meet characters like Stanley and Gil. You meet the prophet, the father. He is kind of like a zealot. He follows Sophia Lamb completely to the T, basically. And when you go to his area, he believes in these false prophets. He believes in these false gods. That god being you, Jack, from the first game. He builds a shrine to you because he believes that you'll come back one day because you came to Rapture and you saved Rapture. You got rid of the tyrant. You got rid of the false god, and you got rid of the devil, that being Andrew Ryan and Fontaine. You got rid of them, and Rapture is now free to be reborn. But you left, and he hopes that you will come back. And there's a shrine to use there, and there's other shrines throughout this one area where you can find them if you know where to look. And there are pictures of characters and enemies that you fought in the last game, of people that you've got rid of, and the corruption that they had, and that sort of thing. And again, it's a beautiful sort of visual representation of how the events of the first game affected the people that are still stuck there. Some people worship you, and some people just don't like what you did because you took away the little sisters, or you killed them, or you saved them. It's the same with every sort of place that you go to. So the presentation in this story is more of sadness. You're no longer seeing the high life and society of Bioshock One and how the rich used to live. You're seeing how the average Joe used to live, where the worker used to live, how hard it was for them to live. And again, this is what I was saying in the introduction, why I enjoyed this game so much, because the presentation gives you more of Rapture. Because at the end of the day, let's be honest, yes, the 1%, they run things and they control things, but it's not the 1% that keeps things going. It's me, it's you, it's, the middle class, the lower class, it's us lot who actually keep society running. And without us keeping things running and keeping things going, the society that they hold up, the society that they run, fails. And it's the same thing with Rapture. It's the same sort of idea, same sort of concept. It's the workers that keep things going. Plasmids were made for workers. Originally, the plasmids were made for the people who built Rapture to keep Rapture going and build it quicker. It was a way so you can use telekinesis to pick up beams and put them in place instead of having to get machinery in. There were a way to get like electricity for was made for engineers and electricians so they could get power to places of Rapture without having to bring in a generator. And eventually it became more commercialized and it became more profitable to sell it to the people, and it came to the part where it wasn't just the workers who needed it, the rich were being given it, and as the rich and powerful do, they need more because they can afford it, and they end up going crazy, and that makes things worse, and it just destabilizes the balance, and eventually the poor gets sort of struck with it as well because they can't afford to keep this addiction up. A lot of Rapture's already been built, so a lot of the workers get made redundant, and eventually it gets to the point where people start to get very needy on this drug, and they can't get it, they can't afford it, and it gets very seedy, and the underbelly just gets very sort of um, yeah, not good at all. And again, this is why I enjoyed this story so much, because it just gives you that, it gives you what you couldn't see, you wasn't allowed to see, because again the 1% don't like to pretend that there's not people below them, that it's just them. So you never got to see that in Bioshock 1, and in Bioshock 2 you get to relive that, and it kind of gives the idea of the presentation that this world was once living, once breathing, once was a utopia, once was gorgeous, and now it's gone back down. And now you can see Sophia Lamb, how she's turned it into a cult, and there are like, you had the old vents which the little sisters crawl through, right? These are now been turned into shrines, and they've got like lovely lace carpet, like a not a red carpet, but it's like a purple carpet that goes around it with candles all around it and butterflies that's meant to resemble rebirth and all that. And the whole idea is that the little sisters are now worshipped, and that's become more culty. There's signs everywhere going, Sophia Lamb will save us. Ryan was the heretic. Ryan was the false prophet. This a new prophet. This Eleanor, this Sophia Lamb will lead us to a new Rapture, to a new family. That Rapture has to die so the family can grow. There's these ideologies and are strewn upon the walls. The level design is fantastic. I understand where Ken Levine was coming from, where he was like, I don't want to have to retell the same story. But this new team that took on Bioshock 2 took it in a different way. It did it more in the idea of philosophy and altruism. You know what I mean? It went away from libertarianism and stuff like that, and it went to more to how it affects the people. How are the people left now to the point of where how easy are they impressionable? Once they've been sold on this false narrative, this false dream, and now they're stuck in this dream and stuck in this utopia, and that utopia has obviously failed. What is left of these people that are left? How gullible are they? What will they believe? What will they follow? So it's easy for somebody like Sophia Lamb to come in to spew her rhetoric and her sort of philosophies and that sort of thing, and kind of tell a story now where it's like, this is the new belief, this is the new concept, this is the new society that I want to build. And because when you have nothing and somebody comes to you with something, you're going to take it on board like it is gospel, and that narrative then shapes and changes how you behave and how the world around you looks. And again, it's done in such a very beautiful way, in such an interesting way. And again, it's very different as well from if you played Bioshock 1 and you know what you're seeing, and then you play Bioshock 2 and you realize, oh god, a lot has changed. And again, this is why I tell people multiple times, if you're going to play these books, make sure you read Bioshock Rapture. I know I keep going on about the book, but the book really sets in stone, because the book, it's not just a prequel, but it sets up Bioshock 1, Bioshock 2. It sets up the characters there. It gives you all the information you need to know. So when you get into the games, you already know who these people are, where they began. You can see that Sophia Lamb had a lot of difficulties with Ryan. How Ryan didn't liked originally, he brought her in as a psychiatrist. He brought her in to help people who were struggling without him. He brought her in to help people, the rich and the famous, struggle with the fact of they couldn't leave. Right, it kind of assess the mental stability of his people. But eventually, people have their own, humans being humans, there is greed, there is narcissism, and she came in with her own agendas, and she basically realized, oh, well, this utopia, like she could see right through it, like this utopia is nothing, it is going to fail, it's going to fall, and when it does, I'm going to swoop in and I'm going to take over. And then when Bioshock 1 comes in, and Andrew Ryan gets taken out, and Atlas gets taken out, and it frees a void of power, somebody's going to sweep in, and she swept in, and she started it all up again. You know what I mean? So the presentation here is very much of the fact of a new powers now coming to Rapture, and it's now changing the very fundamentals of what this place originally was. But again, it's sort of to nothing because eventually the city is going to fall anyway. So even Sophia Lamb says eventually we'll have to leave Rapture, but right now we have to wait till Eleanor is ready. So the presentation of this game is very different, but I enjoy it. I prefer it more to Bioshock 1 because it gives me more of what I want. Um, so that's what I love so much about the presentation. So that's the presentation. On to you as the character, the Big Daddy. This is a section that I like to call You Are the Big Daddy Now. Or, in other words, it's not I am the captain now, it is I am the daddy now. um, yeah, you are a Big Daddy now. You play as a Big Daddy. You're no longer a human. You play as a character called Subject Delta. You are an old series of Big Daddy. Basically, the premise behind it is that before you have the big daddies that you see in Bioshock 1, the original idea for a big daddy was that you were going to imprint on one little sister, and that little sister will be yours forever, and that you would look after her and care for her and just her, right? That was the idea. That was the concept. The problem is behind that, and as you learn through the game when you meet the Project Alphas, is that when you imprint with a little sister, it's all good, it's great. But if anything wants to happen to that little sister, if she would get lost or die or captured or whatever, something would happen where you're not there. Eventually, you would just go crazy. You'd go mad, and eventually you die. If you get too far away from her, that your heart would stop. So eventually, there was too many attacks on little sisters that these sort of Alpha series and Delta series they just didn't work. They were kind of gotten rid of, and that you were one of the last sort of prototypes, the sort of first and last Delta series, um, and you were attached to Eleanor, who was Sophia Lamb's daughter, and Sophia Lamb, being who she is, she basically went, "No, this is my daughter." She didn't like the ideas of the Big Daddies anyway. She wanted to get rid of them, um, and she was like, "No, she's my daughter, not yours. She's not your. She doesn't belong to you." And basically, she makes you kill yourself. Don't worry, this isn't spoilers. This is at the very beginning of the game. You'll learn this straight away. Anyway, 8 years later, Eleanor finds a way to bring you back, and now you are back, and that's basically the start of the game. Now, I enjoy it for the gameplay aesthetic of being a big daddy. I like the idea that I am big, I am powerful, I am strong. Because I'm also being a Delta series, being a prototype series, you were given access to plasmids as well. So you can use sort of the same weapon. You can use all more sort of stronger, more powerful weapons, but also you have access to plasmids. So it makes the gameplay a bit more fun, a bit more sort of versatile. The thing is as well, because you are a big daddy, because you can take more hits, because you can dish out more hits, the game internally is more challenging. Even if you play the game on easy mode, you will be given a lot more challenging modes. You will get a lot more enemies thrown at you because you can take a lot more hits and give a lot more. You're gonna want, to feel like you are a walking tank. So the game does throw a lot more at you, as well as a lot more variants of enemies as well. Like I said, the big brutes, they're a nightmare. So it's a lot more fun because it's no longer where it was when you played as Jack, where you take on a big daddy and it'd be difficult. You take on a big daddy now, it's very easy. So they needed to make it a bit more harder. Like the big sisters are really hard to kill when you fight one of those. The brutes are a nightmare. They're like bullet sponges, but they can be taken down eventually after they're finished throwing things at you. You know, this game it's a lot more challenging, and I enjoy it for that. Like I said, you get access to more powerful weapons. You feel stronger. You feel more powerful. The story behind the Project Delta, the story behind who you was before and who you are now, and your relationship to Eleanor, it's all fascinating. And it brings me a lot more into this world of Rapture, and also answers the question of why Adam is needed, what Adam does, and it kind of gives a reason to what Adam is being used for now in the events of this game, and eventually you find out why it's being used and the idea behind it. I don't want to spoil it because it's part of the story, but again, it adds a bit more sort of reasoning behind it all. It answers more questions than the first game didn't answer. It was just like, collect atom. Why do you need it? Just to get powerful. Okay, what is it? What else is it for? Why else is it being collected? Don't worry about it. You know what I mean? So, like I said in the presentation part and the introduction, it just gives me more of what I love. One of the downsides I have about the gameplay and being a big daddy is that as a big daddy, yes, your job is a little sister. You find little sisters, you protect them, and then you save them. Right? It depends on what ending you want. You can either harvest them or save them. I always choose to save them. The problem is the fact of now you're big daddy and now you're more powerful. You have to be in the role. You've got to be a good big daddy to your little sister. And what this means is that you tediously have to protect her. Now, this is the one thing that I don't like about Bioshock 2, and like it can be made quicker with tonics. Like this process can be sped up using tonics, but it's still a nightmare, right? So it's the same sort of idea as you was for Bioshock 1. You find a big daddy roaming through a certain area, you kill the big daddy, you rescue the little sister. Now, instead of rescuing the little sister and choosing to harvest her or save her, you can choose to, again, you can harvest her or save her, but if you choose to save her, you now have to go on gathering, which means she will tell you where to go. You follow her, sort of what she has to say, and she will say, "Oh, there's an angel over there, Mr. Bubbles." So you've got to settle her down, and she will start gathering. The problem is when she starts gathering, that will alert splicers in your local area. There's atom being gone. Spread like it's going to be like a wildfire. It's going to spread the word like, "Oh, we've got to get there. We've got to take out the little sister." As well as because Sophia Lamb has now sort of indoctrinated and changed the people's minds and perspectives on the little sisters, and they see you as the bad guy. They basically they see, oh, it's our duty to look after the little sisters, get away from him, get away from the big daddy, and they try to kill you anyway. So it's not the fact that they're trying to get the little sister for her atom anymore. They're just trying to, in their idea, save her from you. But obviously you're the one that's trying to save her from them. So it's very sort of same story, different coin, if you get what I'm trying to say, right? And it gets tedious because one little sister will have to gather twice. If you want to get the most atom, you have to gather twice. And if you want the best ending, you have to gather each time. The problem is, you get some levels where you get 3 to 4 little sisters, and you've got to do it twice with each one of them. And it gets very, very teasing. Now, like I said, if you do your research, which I will talk about in a minute, but if you use the research camera, you will unlock tonics that will make the gathering process speed up, and it'll be a lot quicker. Even if you do speed up, though, it's still very tedious where you've got to, again, hunker down. Now, again, this is kind of sort of confirming and sort of giving a more reason to what I said in the first review for Bioshock 1, where you're given a lot of sort of trap sort of ammo types, but you never get a chance to use them unless you can hold up somewhere. Whenever you have to do these things in Bioshock 1, with these gathering sort of things, you do have to hold up. You do have to kind of use your rivet traps. You've got to use your mini turrets and stuff like that. You've got to use these sort of trap proximity mines. There are reasons to use them, and there's an achievement where if you can protect a little sister where she doesn't get attacked and you don't get hit or any damage to you, you can get an achievement, which took me forever to get, and I finally got it, having to replay it now for this review, mainly because I held up in Fontaine's office and I just sort of surrounded the outside and inside full of turrets, and I was just like, no one's getting in, and if they do, I'm just going to use my machine gun on them and I'm just going to take them out. So the gameplay itself as a big daddy, it's fantastic, but if you want the good ending and you want a lot of atom and you want to sort of take use of all the different plasmids and upgrade them and all that things, you've got to tediously you've just got to tediously save all the little sisters, and at the end of it, if you do save all the little sisters, or you choose to harvest all the little sisters, then at the end of it, you will get attacked by a big sister. But it is kind of worth it in the end, because the little sister herself, you've got to fight a big sister. The big sister herself, yes, she's challenging, but she has that atom on her, as well as the atom that you sort of gain from doing all the gathering, as well as if you save enough little sisters, as it was in the first game, you will eventually start with given gifts by the little sisters. And this can be in the form of atom, as well as new tonics and money and stuff like that. So again, it is worth it. It's just made a lot more tedious than it was in the first game. In the first game, it was kill a big daddy, get the little sister, rescuer or harvester, and that was it, and then you were on your way. This is kind of have to stop what you're doing, don't worry about the main quest, hunt for little sisters, save them, gather, wait around twice, protect them, waste all your ammo. Especially if you're playing on high difficulty, it's a nightmare. Trust me. If you on a high difficulty where you have less ammo, and ammo is a lot more sparse, it is a nightmare, and you rely so much more heavily on your drill. You will not believe it, right? So being a Big Daddy is fantastic, but it is very tedious. And that's the only sort of real sort of big issue that I have with Bioshock 2 is just how tedious it is to gather and protect little sisters. Which again, I know is the whole point because I'm a Big Daddy. I know, I get it. I can hear you moaning at me through the ether from the future. I get it. It's just something that gripes me. I don't. If you make me big and powerful, I want to stomp around. Oh, I'm a Big Daddy, and do all that. I don't want to have to stay in one area and protect a little sister constantly. Like I wouldn't mind if it was like every little sister you've got to stay over and gather at least once, or the more little sisters you've got to look after, they limit the amount of times you've got to gather. But doing it twice for at least 3 to 4 little sisters in one level, it just gets tedious. But yeah, as I said, things can be sort of spread up through research and tonics, but again, it's just tedious. But yeah, so that is you are the captain now. You are the Big Daddy now. That's that section. On to plasmids and weapons. Right, so onto the weapons and plasmids. This section will be a bit shorter, mainly because a lot of the plasmids in this game are the same as Bioshock 1, so I won't go into big detail about them. I'll probably just mention them and then move on. The weapons are the only thing that's really different here, because as you would imagine, you are a Big Daddy, which means that you are a lot stronger, which means you can handle a lot more sort of bigger, more powerful artillery. So the weapons are a bit different, but they kind of work somewhat the same. So, as Big Daddy, you have access to the drill, which is the big thing on your arm. You have a hacking tool, which they wanted. The reason they got the hacking tool was because I think I mentioned this in the introduction. They wanted to make the hacking sort of mini game a lot more easier. Because I didn't mention it in Bioshock 1 because it was I never did it because I hated it. But in Bioshock 1, you had these tubes, and you had to kind of get the tubes in the right order before the water spilled out. It was very tedious, very boring, and I just never did it. In this game, you get a hacking tool, and it's a lot more sort of, I'm not sure what it's called, but you had a bar, and it's a lot of red, and then you've got these greens and blues, and you'd have to do, you do this little counter that go back and forth, this little arrow, and you'd have to kind of stop the arrow at the right point to get the green. Maybe as the game went on, you'd have to get more than once. But it was basically a way to make sort of hacking a lot more sort of fun and a lot quicker. And the hacking tool made that so you can hack from a distance, you can hack turrets from a distance, you can get auto hacking darts that were very rare, but if you could find them, they would auto hack, so you didn't have to do the mini game, and it just made it a bit more fun. You've got the launcher, which is basically sort of like a rocket launcher, grenade launcher sort of thing. You got the machine gun, research camera, rivet gun, shotgun, and spear gun. Again, like I mentioned when I was talking about Bioshock 1, I did find myself using, when I originally played this, I find myself using the basics all the time. I find myself always using the rivet gun, the shotgun, and the machine gun. I use those just in tandem with each other. When one runs out of ammo, I'll go to the machine gun, and then when machine gun's gone out of ammo, I will go to the shotgun. But obviously for this sort of review, I use everything. The drill is fantastic. It does have a sort of, you can use it as a melee. You can just hit enemies with it, and you can get tonics to make enemies freeze when you hit them with it and that sort of thing. But also you have it also works as a drill, so you can sort of go to enemies, turn it on, and and basically turn them into mincemeat if you wish. And you can upgrade its damage so it does a lot more damage that way. But you will need fuel, so you need to find drill fuel for that. So I didn't really use it that much, mainly because before you start properly upgrading it, it runs out of fuel very, very quickly. It's fun to do at first, like, oh, this is really cool. But when you realise how much fuel it uses, you tend to kind of pull back and be like, yeah, I'm not going to use that as much. Again, the hacking tool is really helpful and sort of makes things a lot more easier to hack. The launcher's fun. You do get heat-seeking missiles. It's kind of very much like the grenade launcher in the first game. You can get heat-seeking missiles. It does a lot more damage. It's a lot more sort of beefy. It's got a lot more bigger punch to it. Um, the machine gun is basically like it's like a Gatling gun basically on your arm. It's fantastic. It's good for room clearance. I love, and again, that's why I use it so much because especially when you're protecting the little sisters and you just get swarmed by enemies, just have a Gatling gun that you can just, you've got a lot of rounds, so you can just kind of just hold the button down and just, it's got a wide spread. It's fantastic, especially when you upgrade this thing. It's got more accuracy. You can just go. It's like Terminator. You just stand there, you know. I was trying to think of a Terminator line when he does that, but "Hasta la vista, baby." You know. Anyway, moving on. Um, Again, you get your rivet gun, which it's good, and it does pack a bit of a punch. It's not really worth using uh, proficiently and constantly until you fully upgrade it, and you fully upgrade it and it has the ability to set enemies on fire. After, if you shoot enemies at like prolonged shooting them, it will set them on fire, and it will do a lot more sort of fire damage, and just makes things a lot more sort of easy, and the gun a lot more better to use. The shotgun again, it's fantastic. It's a double barrel shotgun. You can upgrade it so it shoots out electric. You can also get this phosphorus ammo, which basically you shoot enemies with. It doesn't do any damage at first, and then these little phosphorus little pellets explode, and they just blow up and pellet. They just set them off enemies on fire. It's absolutely fantastic. And the spear gun, I didn't find myself using the spear gun a lot. It's like the spear gun reminded me a lot of the sort of crossbow in the first game. It's a fantastic device, and when you upgrade it, it's incredibly powerful. But it, you know, unless you're going to snipe an enemy from one side of the level to the next, it's I don't find any much use to it. Like, unless you get a headshot, it's one shot kill and you upgrade it. But again, I'm trying to justify it, but like, even when I try to use it, it's not very good in close quarters. It's better at long range. There's not many moments where you have long range, especially how most of the enemies are running at you. So unless you're going to try your best to be stealthy, which as a big daddy and you stomp around and you make a lot of noise, is you know almost impossible. Unless you're going to try and do a stealthy run like Dishonored. I didn't find any reason to have it. It just felt like you had it because it was a very nautical sort of device. It was very like, oh, you're a big daddy, and it would make sense you have a spear gun. Like, yes, but it's not practical in Rapture. I didn't find it practical anyway. And again, you have a research camera, but the research camera is very different than it was in the first game. In the first game, the idea behind the research camera, to refresh anybody's memory, was that you had to to get the best shot, to get an A+ shot, you had to get up close and personal with an enemy. And especially when they're attacking you, if you get an action shot, you get double points. And you get up close, and they attack you, you take the photo, and then you can fight them. In this one, it was more of a film. So you set the camera rolling, you find the enemy, you set the camera rolling, then you your score is based on how you fight them. So if you just use bullets, that's a few points. But if you use bullets and plasmids, and then you change your bullet types, and then you change the plasmids that you use on the enemy, you get more points, which means the research goes up quicker. So it's done again. It's made it a lot more fun. So instead of having to take photos, you can take films. You can't take the same picture of the same enemy twice like you could in the first game, and you can't take a video of the same enemy twice, so you can't cheese it. You do have to find different enemies, which again the only real upside of doing the gathering was, for me, was doing research. It was so much easier. So having to run around find these enemies, just do a gathering and stand in the corner and just video one guy, kill him quickly, video the next guy, kill him quickly, differently. And that's the way I sort of, in my way, cheese the research system. But I do like the research camera in this. It's done in a lot better. It's made a lot more fun. As for the plasmids, they're very much the same. So you have the cyclone trap from the first game, the decoy, electro bolt, hypnotize, incinerate, insect swarm, security command, scout, summon Eleanor, telekinesis, and winter blast. A lot of these I've mentioned from the first Bioshock. They all basically the same. They all do the same, but now you can upgrade them to do a few other things. Like, for example, Electro Bolt, you can have a charge upgrade on that, so that you can, once you charge up and fire it at one enemy, if there's multiple enemies around that one enemy, it will sort of chain link, and it will go from one enemy to the next, and it will do a lot more damage. Insect swarms will do a lot more damage now when they will swarm, and you can actually throw insects mines as bombs around sort of enemies, and they can be little trap mines. Incinerate, again, you can make a fireball in your hand now, and you can fire this fireball, kind of like a very sort of magey sort of thing. The only real new plasmid that you get, I would say, like, I think Scout's a new one, but I'll be honest, I didn't use Scout very much because Scout just turns you invisible, and again, I'd never really wanted to do it because I was a big daddy. You give me the power fantasy, I now want to live that power fantasy. If you made me a skinny, scrawny splicer assassin, then yeah, I'd want to be invisible. But for me personally, there was no reason to be invisible. Maybe if you played on the high difficulties, it'd be warranted, but not for me. The only real new one that you get was Summon Eleanor, and that is you get that at the end, near to the end of the game, and that basically gives you sort of the option to summon Eleanor, and she comes in to kind of help you. It's a great tool. It uses a lot of Adam, but again, I didn't find myself using it a lot, mainly because by the time that I got to the end of the game, I was so overpowered, and I had all my weapons upgraded, and I had most of my plasmids fully upgraded that I didn't find a need to call her in. She'd just come over the radio every now and she'd be like, "Hello, father. Call me if you need me," and I'd be like, "Thank you, daughter. I'm fine. I'm fine, sweet prince." I don't know where that came from. I do apologise. But yeah, so the plasmids are not really any of that different. It's only the guns that are different, and the guns, even so they are different, they still virtually act the same anyway. So it's not so different. Um, but yeah, so that are the plasmids and weapons. Onto the special mentions. Now, onto the special mentions. This is a few things that I wanted to talk about that I couldn't really fit in anywhere else, and I felt like they deserved to be mentioned. So I thought I'd put them in the special mention sections. The first one would be the Johnny Topside audio diaries. Now, as I mentioned in the first game, and I did the audio diaries when I spoke about Bioshock 1 and the special mentions, but I didn't really choose a specific story. I just talked about them specifically as a whole. But in this game, as I mentioned, you are given a lot more in terms of lore. You're given a lot more times in story, and if you know where to look in terms of the audio diaries, there'll be an audio story that you'll listen to as the game progresses. And this might be classed as spoilers, and I'll try my best to kind of stay away from spoilers as much as possible. But the story of Johnny Topside, or Mike Meltzer, is a story of a man who he's basically his daughter went missing, and he was a rich man, and he kind of tracked down to the whereabouts of his daughter, somehow found his way to Rapture, and with his own diving bell and his own sort of diving suit found his way into Rapture. And this story is kind of retold to you in a lot more in depth if you read the book, Bioshock Rapture. But the simple premise behind it is that when he got round down into Rapture and he started looking for his daughter, he found her, and he found that his daughter had been turned into a little sister. But by the time he found his daughter, Ryan had basically found him, and basically thought that he was a spy, thought that he was the KGB or the CIA or the FBI and all this, and that he'd found his way down here to basically steal technology, to sell secrets and that sort of thing back to the surface. So Ryan imprisoned him and didn't believe the story behind his come down looking for his daughter. Like, Ryan didn't believe, and again, a lot of this is taken from the book, and a lot of this is taken from the audio that you find. But Ryan didn't believe his story that a man this wealthy, this rich, would come all this way to look for his daughter. It just didn't make no sense to him. So he thought he was lying, that he was a spy. And in the end, Johnny Topside, that's what they ended up calling him. They don't call him by his name, they call him Johnny Topside because that's this kind of the story that went around about him, about this legend, about this man who came down in a diving bell, found his way to Rapture. And then people just wondered why you'd want to come down here for. So, again, I'm trying to stay away from spoilers. So Mark gets put into prison, or Johnny Topside, and then he gets sold to Fontaine to basically do the experiments on. And you find this out through the story that a lot of the prisoners, a lot of the people that did wrong in Rapture, were basically put in prison, and instead of being kept in prison, would just use as lab experiments for new types of plasmids and new types of Big Daddy's experiments and that sort of things. So the reason I love this story so much is not just because it sort of connects itself to the main story of Bioshock 2 and the main characters, but also it kind of it reinforces the idea behind what you'll do for your children, and how far you'll go to find your children. How this man had, was a rich man, was as a man of power, man of influence, and then lost his daughter, and then found his way through money and through sort of expenditure, found his way to Rapture, he tracked her down to this city which was meant to be hidden and nobody was meant to know about it, found his way there, managed to kind of skulk around Rapture without being caught, finally catches up with his daughter, finally to kind of have that revelation of like all that time, all that money was well spent because I finally found my daughter and we're going to escape together, only to find her and to realise it's too late, that his daughter's now long gone, she's now a little sister, there's no saving her. It's a sad story, but again, the reason I mention it is because it's done in such a great way, and like I mentioned, I'm staying away from spoilers, but how it intertwines with the main story and the main characters, that it overall it just works perfectly, and it's one of those sort of tales where you're like, this is why I play games like this. This is why I play narrative single player games, to give you that extra sort of backstory, and it's why I love looking for audio logs and collectibles in video games, especially games that I'm interested in, because you get to learn more about the world that's going on that's not presented to you. Like if you didn't find any of these audio logs, you wouldn't find all this extra stuff. Like the game would do enough to tell you what you need to know, but if you want to learn more, they're there, and I love that. So I just wanted to mention this Johnny Topside sort of story. And again, I want to reinforce, read the book. You learn more about that and about other things as well. Mainly my main presentation is just to force people to read the book, really. I'm doing Titans books work for them. Just read the book, please do, especially before the TV movie or whatever they're making on Netflix comes out, especially before the next Bioshock game comes out. Read the book, learn more about this world, because it will do you so much good. Next thing I wanted to mention was the new choice and consequence changes that were made in this game. In the first game, your choice and consequences were to save or harvest the little sisters, and that was about it. If you chose to harvest all the little sisters, you'd get the bad ending, and then the splicers would find their way to the surface and kill, basically go on a rampage and kill everybody on land. I don't know how, but that's just how that would work. You'd become the new ruler of Rapture, and you would just send your people above ground and sort of take over the world. The good ending was that you and the little sisters, because you were dying, you and the other little sisters that all you saved would go to the surface, and that you'd live the rest of your life with loads of daughters, with a new life, and it was really lovely sort of ending. And that's the ending of sort of Bioshock 1, if you choose a good ending. In this game, it's a bit different. So the choice and consequences are now more so story narrative sort of driven, and that you are given the choice to either so those choices are save every little sister or harvest every little sister, or you get given the choice of you can save all the little sisters, and as well as doing that, spare Grace, Stanley and Gil. These are the choices you get made. Now you can kill all the little sisters and kill Grace, Stanley and Gil. You can do all that if you want, or you can save half the little sisters and only kill half of them. It's completely up to you what you decide to do, but if you want the best ending, your choice is to save all the little sisters, even though it's very, very tedious, and to spare Grace, Stanley and Gil. Stanley, Grace and Gil, I didn't mention them in the main review, but they are characters that you meet who are sort of, again, try to stay away from story specifics for spoiler reasons, but they are connected to you, the main character, as well as Eleanor. And they've been led astray by Sofia Lamb to think different things, to think of you differently, to think of Okay, again, you know what, I'm not going to carry that on because I feel like if I carry it, I'll go to spoilers. But the basic premise behind it, that they've done a lot of things in their past that are either right or wrong, or believe that you, Delta, have wronged them, or that sort of thing. So you have the choice to, when you finally meet them, to get revenge on them or to spare them. When I first played the game, I didn't really know much about the choice and consequence. I just sort of was like, well, yeah, that person wronged me. I'm going to sort of get revenge and kill them. But again, it's that thing of, as you grow up and as you mature, and as I've grown up and mature, I've realised that revenge isn't the answer. It never is. It never really works out. Um, so I chose to forgive, and to spare them. And there's a reason behind it, because what you find, again, I'm trying to stay away from spoilers, but as you find, as you play for the game, Eleanor is learning through your choices. Who Eleanor grows to be and who Eleanor grows to become is all down to you, without you knowing. You, by your choice in the game, chooses what kind of woman she grows up to be. So if you show to be very noble, to very forgiving, very honourable, she will again be very honourable, very forgiving. She learns from you, learns from her daddy, learns from her big daddy, learns from my father. But if you are very ruthless, if you harvest all the little sisters and you kill Grace, Stanley, and Gil, then she learns of like, well, my father was these things, so I should be these things, and she becomes the exact same as you, very hard and horrible and mean and nasty and revengeful, and it depends on what ending you want to get, but overall the choice and consequences actually reflect how the game works. I mean, well, not how the game works, but how the narrative works and how the levels look. Like if, for example, if you choose to save Grace, she will start sending you packages. She will start giving you help, and she's the only one to do that. Stanley and Gil don't, which always confused me. It was like, well, why would one help but the other wouldn't if I spared them? But then again, I guess it's their character, isn't it? You know. Stanley and Gil. Well, when you meet them, you'll figure it out. But their character, of who they are as a person, they're not very helpful people. Really, they don't really deserve to be spared, for being honest. But you kind of have to if you want the best ending. Grace is the only one that's actually worth sort of sparing, really, in my opinion. But again, I won't go into it because of spoilers. But yeah, so it is worth it, and I just wanted to mention that. So, my overall thoughts and feelings on Bioshock 2 is I love it. Like I said, it's not a perfect game. It's not a masterpiece. Like, again, there are things in it like the tedium of having to constantly sit there with the little sisters and protect them all the time. Yes, that gets it. There is no big twist like there was with the first Bioshock. There isn't a whole sort of would you kindly and all that. There's nothing like that. So even though that's not the game's fault, because as I mentioned, even Bioshock can't top itself with those twists now, because once you've done it once, it's done such a perfect way that it's really hard to do it again, in the same manner or differently. You know what I mean? So it's not its fault for that. It's just something that just is one of those things. But even saying it's still a fantastic game, it's still a great game, and I never really understood why the game got such a hard rap. And I feel like now, people who are doing retrospectives, the people who are coming back to this game years later, are actually starting to appreciate it for what it is. Because I think the issue was for the game originally was that a lot of people played Bioshock 1, had come to know Bioshock 1 very well, the ins and outs of the world, the gameplay, Rapture, Would You Kindly, and all that. And we had hoped and expected the sequel to be the same, if not better. Which, again, is hard. It's impossible to do, because once you do it once, once you've let that genie out of the bottle, you're not getting that genie back in. No matter how much you try your best. So I feel like people overhyped themselves, hyped themselves for more than what was or could happen. So when you played this game, I think a lot of people were like, well, this is not the same what I liked, and this wasn't this or that. And again, hype kills a lot of things. But I kind of went into Bioshock 2 with a different aspect. I was like, well, I love what Bioshock 1 did. I want to see what the sequel does. And for me, it was perfect. As I mentioned, it took the gameplay I took everything that I liked from that. Or you took the weapons and all the blessed plasmids and the gameplay mechanics and improved upon them. Made the hacking better. Made me more big, made me more powerful, made me stronger. Took the story in a different direction. Took the narrative in a different direction. Showed me how Rapture was 8 years later. Now it's decrepit. Now it's a wreck. Now it's fallen to pieces. It showed me everything that I wanted and more. Like, granted, yes, it's not perfect, but again, that's not a bad thing. No game needs to be perfect. Nothing needs to be perfect. It just needs to be good. I've played a lot of games where the gameplay is shit, but the narrative and story is so good that it's kept me sort of entertained. And I've had the opposite as well. I've had where the story's been terrible, but the gameplay is so much fun that it doesn't matter. In this, the narrative and gameplay are both fantastic, that I don't care so much, even though I moaned about it. There are times where I can look over the idea behind the tedium of the big of looking after the little sister all the time. I can look over other things that the whole big twist is not as good. Well, I'm getting more than what I love. I'm not going to moan about it. I'm just happy to get a sequel. You know what I mean? So overall, for me, Bioshock 2, it's an underrated gem, and I hope that more people look into it and actually give it a go. And because it deserves it. It deserves a second chance. It deserves to be looked at and looked into a lot more by people. And I feel like don't rate it on Bioshock 1. Don't do that to it, because it doesn't deserve it. It's not fair. Review it on its own merits. Review it for what it is, not what you want it to be. And I feel like if you can do that, you probably get a lot more enjoyment out of it. And it's the same with anything else. You'll get a lot more enjoyment out of things if you review them for what they are, not what you wish them to be. So that's been my review of Bioshock 2. Stick around for the end to learn about all the different socials and stuff like that if you wish. If you don't, thank you very, very much for listening, and I will catch you in the next one. But for you guys that are going to stick to the end, let's off to the end, shall we? So here we are at the end. Thank you very much for those of you who are still with me, who stuck till the end. I greatly appreciate it. So yeah, what did you think of my thoughts and feelings of Bioshock 2? What do you feel of my feelings of Bioshock so far? I will get around to reviewing Bioshock Infinite. That one I feel like I'm going to put on the back burner because one, I've done a lot of Bioshock recently. Don't get me wrong, I love it. But I feel like in terms of content, in terms of making you guys interested and basically wanting to stick around, if I just do nothing but Bioshock, it's going to get a bit tedious. It's not going to be as special and as grand and as fun. So I feel like I've given you enough for now. You've got the book, you've got Bioshock 1, Bioshock 2. So because Bioshock Infinite is its own sort of thing, as well as you've got the Under the Sea DLC, which is very much as well, even though it's DLC, I would still call that sort of Bioshock Infinite sort of like 3.4. You know what I mean? Like it's its own game in its own right. So I would want to give those games their own sort of footing. So I'll get around to going back to Infinite and all that eventually, not straight away. So there's no real rush into it. But I hope you really liked my deep dive into Rapture so far. If you have, again, please do let me know on Twitter at Nerdstalgic_pod. But also you can find this podcast on Spotify. You can find me on Anchor, which is now Spotify for podcasts. They've changed the name, but you can find me on there. Google Podcasts, Amazon Music Podcasts. You can find me on TuneIn. You can find me on Audible. You can find me on YouTube. Just type in the Nerdstalgic podcast there. Basically, you can find me anywhere but Apple Podcasts, because I'm not currently on there. So anywhere where you can get podcasts, just search my name and I most likely will be on there somewhere. Also, if you listen to this on Spotify, don't forget to give me a star rating, 1 to 5 stars. 5 stars, best thing you've ever heard in your life. You completely agree with me about Bioshock 2, it's an underrated gem. Or 1 star where you feel like I'm completely lying and Bioshock 2 is trash. Whatever you feel like is fair, 1 to 5 stars helps me greatly. And also, if you listen to this on YouTube, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, share and all that jazz, because it really does help out immensely. Really, really does. I've seen such a spike up on YouTube lately in terms of views and likes and even comments. which is fantastic. But also subscribers as well. There's such been a really boost recently of people that subscribe, and I don't know what I've done, but a lot of people sort of jumped on the bandwagon recently. So as much as you can share, comment, like, it all helps out for the videos to get seen by more people, and hopefully more people want to jump on board to our little fun train, and we can have a laugh together. So this video's already been long enough as it is. I'm not going to go any sort of longer. But thank you very, very much for listening to today's episode. I have been your host, Luke the Human. You've been listening to the Nerdstalgic podcast, and thank you very, very much. I appreciate you so, so much, and I will catch you in the next one. All right, guys. Bye-bye.